Baru was always ready to step in. If someone got too greedy, she'd boot them right out of the way without a second thought. The reporter's voice burst with excitement. They're eating the giants. The insects are eating the giants. Seeing those terrifying giants, who had been eating people, now getting chomped by ants was a huge relief for everyone in Japan. But then, something unexpected happened. Hey! Both the reporter and the cameraman jumped back as Baru sprang into the helicopter, grabbed the camera pointing at her, and smashed it to pieces without thinking twice. Snap! Yikes! The two guys clung to each other, shaking like leaves. Baru just gave them a silent stare one by one before hopping back down. They let out loud sighs of relief. Phew! Huzzah! The winged ant had a habit of wrecking expensive cameras, but the crew kept filming because viewers loved seeing his little army of ants. The cameraman pulled out some backup gear he'd brought just in case, while the reporter, who was used to Baru's crazy behavior, kept going without missing a beat. This is Kitamura reporting live, the reporter said with a grin. Suddenly a young girl around 12 years old came running into view, screaming at the top of her lungs, and crying her eyes out. Whoa! A giant was chasing her, its creepy grin spreading wide. But how far could she get with those tiny legs? The gap between them shrunk fast. The giant flashed its sharp teeth and laughed. Like it was enjoying this twisted game of tag, it reached out with an arm way longer than usual for a giant. Just as its rough hand was about to snatch the small girl, a streak of blue lightning zapped the giant's wrist, leaving a burn. Floss! The giant howled in pain, clutching its wrist. Gray, ow. Then up stepped Agris, holding a glowing blue sword, and staring down the giant, like it was no big deal. The girl was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Her face was as pale as paper, and her legs felt like jelly. Before she knew it, Igris swept her up in his arms, and took off running. The giant's angry roar echoed through the air, as it realized its food was getting away. Its eyes blazed with fury, and it let out a deafening growl that would have scared even the bravest person silly. But then someone stepped right in the giant's path. It was Iron, the elite knight, shining in his powerful armor, ready to face the beast head-on. Iron slammed his massive shield into the ground, puffed out his chest like a superhero, and let out a thunderous roar. Ha-G-R-R-A-A. Ha-G-R-N uses epic taunt. The giant's attention snaps toward him. Thought the towering giant, which had been about to crush Igris, suddenly forgot all about its target. Its fiery eyes locked onto Iron instead. Iron thumped his chest a few times like a drum, and grabbed his gigantic shield, challenging the beast to come at him. Ha-G-R-Ice. The furious giant swung at Iron with all its might. Ha-G-R-Ice. 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 His recent upgrades made him nearly unstoppable. Ha-G-R-Ice. Ha-G-R-Ice. Da-G-R-Ice. The giant kept swinging, but Iron stood firm like an unshakable mountain. Finally, after taking dozens of hits, he let out a mighty roar and prepared to strike back. Let's go! Jin-Woo shouted, and his shadow soldiers and ice bears sprang into action. Tank, the leader of the ice bears, and one of Jin-Woo's most trusted fighters, let out a thunderous roar. The ground rumbled with his mighty roar. A reporter watching from a distance couldn't help but cheer, high-fiving the camera. This is epic, they exclaimed. Whoa, are you guys seeing this? Hunter Sung's minions are going wild on that giant. Is this really happening? This reporter never thought much of Yuri or love, so honestly Jin-Woo Sung didn't seem like a big deal either. But look at what's happening now. Hunter Sung or Jin-Woo has his minions spread out across the country, taking down giants left and right. Could it be? Maybe, just maybe, Jin-Woo Sung is actually going to save Japan after all. The reporter got choked up at the thought. Over there. The cameraman yelled, pointing toward the giant. The reporter turned fast, tears welling up in his eyes. How is this possible? He exclaimed. The giant staggered as lightning bolts from Igris's sword kept hitting it. It was such an amazing sight that everyone watching was left speechless. The Hunters Association of Japan headquarters were right in the middle of Tokyo. Imagine a world where massive giants suddenly pour out of nowhere, causing chaos and destruction. Before this invasion, life was normal, but everything changed when these giants emerged from the S-rank gate in Shinjuku. During the initial attack, many hunters and soldiers sacrificed themselves to save President Shinjuku. While it's not the southernmost city in Japan, he believed that if Osaka fell, the country would be doomed. With over 2.26 million civilians living there, protecting Osaka became their top priority. The fate of Japan now rested on defending the city and its people from the giant threat looming over them. Japan was on its last legs, facing what felt like an unbeatable foe, the giants. When word spread that these towering beings had reached Nagoya, a city teeming with life, Matsumoto slumped in defeat. The nation teetered on the edge of collapse. Asking for help from other countries seemed pointless now. The Hunters Association of Japan had made some shady deals, and when President Gun-Hee-go of Korea spilled the beans on live TV, it pretty much sealed their fate. No one was eager to lend a hand after that. With the government temporarily set up in Kyoto, they quickly called Matsumoto in for an urgent meeting. The clock was ticking, and every second counted. Matsumoto was on his knees facing the politicians who were demanding he take responsibility. "I'm sorry," he said. "This is my fault, but I need a little more time to fix things. Please wait before making your decision." The Prime Minister stood quietly for a moment, then nodded. "All right. We'll give you that time." Everyone knew Matsumoto was responsible for the crisis, but fixing the dungeon mess had to happen first. His punishment might come later. Even after things calmed down, he could be used as a warning to others. When Jin-Woo arrived in Japan, President Matsumoto was eager to meet him. He had already accepted his fate, but didn't want his country to face the same future. As soon as Jin-Woo arrived, President Matsumoto felt chills run down his spine, but there was no denying it. Jin-Woo was incredibly powerful. After meeting so many powerful people as president of the association, he could tell right away. Even though he'd met tons of strong hunters before, very few had ever made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end like this. Actually, none had. If he'd known Jin-Woo before the Jeju Island raid, he definitely would have called off the plan to betray the Korean hunters. Ryuji Goto's judgment about Jin-Woo was spot on. The man standing in front of him had a dangerous vibe. But then there were those giant magic beasts that had broken out of the S-rank gate, and Jin-Woo was no match for them on his own. "Please," Ryuji urged, "just focus on protecting Osaka." He needed Jin-Woo to give us a little extra time so we could work things out with the US or Russia. But then Jin-Woo's response completely threw a wrench in the plan. "No thanks," Jin-Woo said flatly. President Matsumoto and the other leaders looked like they'd just seen a ghost. Their faces turned pale, and their eyes widened in fear. President Matsumoto looked at Jin-Woo in shock. "Wait, did you really come all this way just to change your mind?" he asked hesitantly. Jin-Woo didn't answer. Instead, he split his minions into 3 teams, and sent them off in different directions. Then, he headed out on his own path. The number of minions was huge, but what really made President Matsumoto gulp was something else. Was Jin-Woo seriously planning to face those giants alone? That seemed impossible, something no other hunter in the world would even attempt. President Matsumoto was left with questions but no answers. All he could do was leave the fate of the country to fate, and wait. President Matsumoto returned to the Hunters Association headquarters to figure out what was going on. His question was answered sooner than he expected. "The city of Nagoya has been retaken," someone announced. "What?" The president leapt out of his chair. Barely any time had passed. So how could Hunter Sung already have defeated one of the giants? Reports kept coming in fast. A giant's corpse was found in Nakatsugawa. One message read. Then came another. "Suzuoka is back under control." Before anyone could catch their breath, more news arrived. Takayama and Nagano were next. Jin-Woo and his team were moving super fast toward Tokyo. President Matsumoto felt a shiver down his spine, as this Korean hunter turned the impossible into reality, right before everyone's eyes. His heart raced like crazy until finally, "Mafo, Hunter Sung has arrived in the city of Kofu." President Matsumoto dropped into his chair at the news that Jin-Woo and his followers had reached Kofu, a city just 1330 kilometers from Tokyo. "Sir," someone shouted urgently. President Matsumoto didn't even look up. He was too stunned to move. His legs felt like jelly, and he couldn't stand no matter how hard he tried. Hunter Sung had always planned to take down the giants by himself. Then it hit him: Hunter was doing exactly what I had plotted against Korea. President Matsumoto wanted to sideline Korean hunters, so that Japan's could step in and lead. But now, everything was flipped. The Japanese hunters were struggling, and Jin-Woo, a hunter from Korea, was dominating all by himself. He was achieving something that even President Matsumoto, the Hunters Association of Japan, their strongest hunters, and the entire Japanese government couldn't do together. President Matsumoto suddenly came back to reality, his mind snapping out of its stunned state. He turned to his worried team and gave them an urgent order. "Please leave the room. I need some time alone," he said quietly. Now alone in the quiet space, he lowered his head. The weight of what had happened pressed down on him harder than anything he'd ever felt before. President Matsumoto had faced total defeat, but as he stood there for a moment, something shifted inside him. A wave of thankfulness washed over him, and it felt never-ending. Jin-Woo wiped away a few tears as he and his crew set off towards the rising sun from Osaka. They battled giant after giant. Along the way, and before long they arrived in Tokyo. The city was just waking up when two giants came crashing down. Thud. A message popped up. "You have leveled up." Jin-Woo pumped his fist in the air. "Yes," he shouted. He hadn't had a level up this easy in ages. Jin-Woo's fists tightened as he charged straight from Osaka to Tokyo, determined to get to the source of the dungeon break. So far in his mission, he'd mowed down 13 giants and leveled up 6 times. Each giant was worth as much experience as a boss in any other dungeon, so Jin-Woo was raking in the points with every takedown. He was unstoppable, like a high-speed train barreling through the opposition, and he wasn't slowing down anytime soon. This was just the beginning of his epic quest. His soldiers were also super busy taking down giants, which added to his total. Jin-Woo couldn't stop himself from pumping his fist every time he got a notification. And then, "Daishin, you have leveled up." There it was. Jin-Woo grinned as the familiar voice popped into his head. "My king, we've taken down another enemy," said Baru. His army of ants was moving faster than any of the other two groups. Baru was Jin-Woo's top warrior, so it made sense that he was leading the charge, and the ants made up a huge part of Jin-Woo's army. Baru stepped forward to report their victories. Jin-Woo praised their achievements with a grin. "Nice work," he said. "You're doing an excellent job." Baru bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, my king." Then Jin-Woo checked in on the other two armies using sensory sharing. While they weren't quite as unstoppable as Baru and his ant army, Fang's High Orc division was smashing through their tasks, and Dagris's elite squad was handling things smoothly. Just as expected, everything was falling into place. Jin-Woo was grinning from ear to ear as he watched his soldiers level up one after another. "Boss, should we set up camp here for the night?" Jin-Woo opened his eyes to see Jinyo already unfolding a tent. He glanced up at the sky. Sure enough, the sun was dipping below the horizon. Even though he wasn't physically exhausted, thanks to some recovery potions and the boost from leveling up, his mind felt like it had run a marathon. "I could really use some rest." Aki nodded in agreement, and the group quickly got to work setting up their camp for the night. This would be their campsite for the night. The two men worked together to set up the tent and get dinner ready. It was autumn, and the air was crisp with a chilly wind blowing through. As Jin-Woo warmed up their meal, provided by the Hunters Association of Japan, over the fire, he thought about how winter might not be too far away. Winter. He gazed out at the view. Tokyo was visible from where they were camped. If you think of a city's life like changing seasons, Tokyo felt stuck in winter. The city looked broken and empty, but somehow familiar. Jin-Woo frowned, trying to remember where he had seen this before. It hit him. This reminded him of the Demon's Castle dungeon he had raided before. The cities there were all in ruins, just like Tokyo. But wait, those cities were always burning, and Tokyo wasn't on fire at all. Jin-Woo's eyes narrowed as a dark thought crossed his mind. Could this mean something was very wrong? Was the system's creator hinting at something big? Jin-Woo let out a scoff. Honestly, who cared? The architect had died in some dungeon, and Jin-Woo hadn't heard from it since. There was no way it could have survived. If this was a sign of what was coming next, well, Jin-Woo would just have to stop it. He'd been building his power for one reason. He never wanted to be overshadowed by anyone. He had worked hard, earned new skills, and leveled up again to reach this moment. Thud. His black heart pounded in his chest, as if answering his thoughts. Jin-Woo placed a hand over his heart, and gave a small smile, feeling its steady beat. A doctor at the hospital had told him everything about him was completely normal. Nothing out of the ordinary here, the doctor had said, and for once, his heart was working perfectly. "You're totally fine, Hunter-san," said Jin-Woo, who had just gotten a checkup before leaving Korea. The doctor scanned his chest twice, but didn't find anything unusual. The black heart wasn't something you could see or touch. It was more like a strange feeling inside, even though Jin-Woo could sense it beating. It wasn't really there. That sounds crazy. Jin-Woo burst out laughing at the absurdity of it all. He let out a sigh of relief when he realized he was built just like everyone else. But then, where was this heartbeat coming from? A soft wind drifted toward them from downtown Tokyo, carrying with it an incredibly scary and almost heavy manhwa. Boss. Jinyo muttered uncomfortably. Even someone like Jinyo, who wasn't very perceptive, could feel how powerful the manhwa was. Jin-Woo nodded silently, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. The thick, eerie energy in the air sent chills down their spines. The wind came from a huge guard in Shinjuku. It felt different, giving Jin-Woo goosebumps. He laughed, feeling the black heart beat as it reacted to the giant's energy. How many levels would Jin-Woo jump after beating this guy? And what kind of shadow soldier would he face next? Jin-Woo was super excited to find out. Meanwhile, Igris's elite warriors and ice bears were the first to march into Tokyo. Right behind them came Fang's high orc army. Igris noticed their approach and gave a cool nod. Fang, hiding under his hood, grinned and nodded back. Stomp, stomp, stomp. The steady beat of marching echoed through the misty air as a massive group of shadow soldiers appeared from the fog. This was Baru's army of ants. They had traveled the farthest path, defeating the most giants along the way, which made them the last to arrive in Tokyo. Igris stepped forward to greet Baru, but Baru ignored him and walked straight up to Jin-Woo. From behind, Baru dropped down on one knee in respect. "Oh, now everyone's here," Jin-Woo said, turning away from a distant giant he'd been staring at. "Great job, everyone," he added, smiling proudly at his team. Those who could stand followed Baru's lead, and knelt down too, showing their respect for Jin-Woo. The ice bears weren't exactly made for moves like that, so they crouched down and pressed their noses against the ground. In front of Jin-Woo stood an incredible mix of shadow soldiers, humanoid figures, giant bear-like creatures, ant-like ones, towering orcs, slithering naga, and plenty of others he'd gathered along the way. The crowd was huge, nearly 1,000 strong. "Up you go," Jin-Woo said with a wave of his hand, and in an instant, the whole squad jumped to their feet. It was an incredible sight to see so many different warriors standing together, ready for whatever came next. Jinyo was totally blown away by what he saw. Good thing these creatures were just the boss's minions. If they had been real magic beasts, the thought alone made him shiver. He couldn't believe how powerful this group of magic beasts would be, if they were set loose in the world. Luckily they were on his side, and Alyu was a word that fit Jin-Woo better than anyone else he knew. But there was something even more amazing right behind him. Jinyo gulped and glanced nervously behind him. That's when he saw it. A massive giant unlike anything he'd ever laid eyes on before. The beast was so huge, it could have been mistaken for a skyscraper. Jinyo's breath caught in his throat, as he stared up, way up, at the towering creature. "Whoa," he muttered, barely believing what he was seeing. The difference between seeing something in a video and seeing it in real life was totally different. Jinyo stood there completely blown away. Jin-Woo laughed and patted Jinyo on the head. "Hey dude, you might want to close your mouth before it hits the floor." Jinyo snapped back to reality, looking embarrassed. Boss." He stuttered, scratching the back of his neck. Meanwhile, Jin-Woo was busy checking out the giant. How in the world did something like this even exist? It was impossibly huge, like way bigger than anything you'd see in a movie or a game. The creature towered over them, so big it didn't even seem real. Jin-Woo's heart raced as a chilling energy surrounded him, making him want to run away as fast as he could. Something about this felt really bad. And he knew there were usually two options in moments like these, either escape and hide, or face whatever it was head on. He had already made his choice, even before leaving Korea, or maybe from the moment he'd gained his new powers. Thud-thud went his heartbeat as he closed his eyes for a second, savoring the sound. Then he turned to Jinyo. "Stay far back," he said. "Got it," Jinyo replied, nodding firmly before hurrying away, slipping past the line of shadowy soldiers. Jin-Woo waited until Jinyo was safely out of range. Then, with a calm command, he called out, "Come forth." Thus the shadow soldiers that stepped into the light weren't as massive as the giant boss, but they were still huge and intimidating. Jin-Woo named his shadow soldiers. No, 1 through 13 based on when he'd brought them out. With these powerful frontline warriors leading the charge, his army seemed totally unstoppable. He was all set. Raising his hand high in the air, Jin-Woo signaled to his shadow soldiers. "My soldiers," he said, his voice steady and confident. Some of them were dressed in sleek black armor, while others looked like they were made of swirling black smoke. Jin-Woo glared at each person around him before locking eyes on the giant far away. The giant barely noticed him, staring down coldly, as if Jin-Woo wasn't even worth the effort to squash. This is super annoying, Jin-Woo thought to himself. He hated being treated like he didn't matter. A wild smile spread across his face, and he raised his hand, pointing straight at the giant. "Advance," he shouted. Baru tossed his head back, and let out a loud screech, ready for battle. Skrotale, Baraye. The army charged forward like a single fierce unit. Roe rumble. The ground rumbled like thunder, kicking up clouds of dust as Jin-Woo's soldiers stepped into the giant's territory. As soon as they entered, everything around them changed in an instant. "What the bee?" Jin-Woo shouted in shock. In the blink of an eye, the giant vanished and then reappeared. But when it did, half of Jin-Woo's soldiers were gone. The giant had slid across the battlefield with its legs stretched out wide, sweeping through the army like a destructive tornado, and wiping out half of them in one devastating move. The soldiers had been split into two groups, but they weren't about to let the giant get off scot-free. Before the dust even settled, Fang jumped back into action. He puffed out his chest, took a deep breath, and then Jin-Woo could feel how shocked Fang was. The giant grabbed a soldier by the ankle. Normally this minion was as big as a building, but in the giant's massive hand, it looked as small as a kid. Before Fang could react, the giant slammed the soldier into him, sending both of them crashing into each other with a loud thud. Jin-Woo's eyes narrowed as Fang disappeared in a burst of black smoke. The battle between Jin-Woo's army and the giant had started, but it wasn't much of a fight. The giant was smashing soldiers left and right, like they were bugs. Kakruti, or coke, every punch kick, or Jin-Woo stood between he and Igris, who were both super ready to jump into battle. They were waiting for his signal, but you could tell they were really eager to fight. "Not just yet," Jin-Woo said, pressing his lips together. Even though he had gained a lot of power from the Black Heart, using it made his energy drop quickly because his soldiers kept healing and coming back. But he stayed calm and kept watching the huge monster. His plan was simple: use his army of immortal soldiers as bait, to figure out his opponent's weak spot. Then, wham! A towering giant smashed those shadowy soldiers like bugs under its knee, and pounded the ground with a fist that made the earth shake like crazy. Boom! The streets trembled so hard, it felt like an earthquake, and thousands of soldiers vanished into thin air, turning to black smoke. With the giant's rock-solid defense and super-strong attacks, the battle felt like something out of a nightmare. But hey, it wasn't all bad. There was still a glimmer of hope. In the middle of the empty city, Jin-Woo's eyes sparkled with focus.
"I knew it!"
The giant's tough skin was covered in a thin layer of magical energy that acted like armor, protecting it from harm. Because of this shield, the giant swung its massive fists wildly without even bothering to guard itself. But there was one moment when it flinched just for an instant, revealing a crack in its defense. Jin-Woo's eyes lit up as he realized something crucial. "Wait, did I just..."